Well, I got to know, is there anyone excited about church today? Very excited. Today we are continuing our series, Movies, Modern Day Parables. And before we dive into things, just want to address a couple things. One, I want to give a shout out. At Next Level Church, we don't have members, we have owners. Members have rights, but owners have responsibilities. And that means that if Next Level is your church, you're you're responsible for helping make this place the best that it can be. And every week in this series, we have provided things like popcorn and candy and soda, and you guys really enjoy that. By the sound of it during worship, you really enjoy those movie snacks. And we're happy to provide them, but they do cause a little bit extra of a mess. And last week after this service, I saw a family going row by row, sweeping up all the popcorn that had been dropped. And I walked up to them and I said, hey, are you on this team? Is this part of your job? They said, no. I said, did anyone ask you to do this? They said, no, we just saw a problem. We jumped in and we took care of it. And that's what owners do. Owners see a problem, they fix it. And so I want to give them a shout out. Would you help me thank them? Second thing, if you would remember just to pray for me throughout the day if you could. Got back from camp on Friday and Saturday, woke up with a man cold. And if you are here today and you are a woman and you have given birth, then you almost know what it's like to have a man cold. You have you haven't quite felt the pain, but almost. And so right now, currently, I am hyped up on Sudafed and the Holy Spirit. So if you would remember to pray for me. And also, just want to ask for your grace. I may cough or sneeze, clear my throat throughout this sermon. And just wanted to explain to you that is the reason why. Well, today we're continuing our series, Movies, Modern Day Parables. And a parable is a story with a point. And what we learned in the New Testament is that every time Jesus teaches the crowds, he uses a parable. He tells them a story. And it's up to them to figure out, well, what was the point of that story? Why did you tell it? What was the meaning behind it? And in the same way, our movies today, all of them have a point. And we should be asking ourselves, what is the point? What's the parable of that movie? And so in this series, we're going to look at some movie clips and see how it illustrates a point that we find in the Bible. And this week's parable, it was a modest hit. It did not make a lot of money at the box office. In fact, many of you probably did not see it. The film made $26 million, which is not a lot for a movie, for box office records. But this is a film that I highly recommend. If you have not seen it, I encourage you to go check it out. It is a very clean film. And there's a chance that if you're here today, you are somewhat familiar with the story of this movie, even if you haven't seen the film. The movie is based off the real-life story of NFL quarterback Kurt Warner. And Kurt Warner had an underdog story. It was fascinating, and it's really, you can't believe that it's a real-life story that happened to a real person. But in this film, we're going to see how it points to a character that we also learn about in the Bible. So with that being said, I present to you this week's parable, American Underdog. Check it out. So Kurt Warner had an impossible dream. He wanted to play in the NFL, and he wanted to be a quarterback. He ends up going to a small Division III college, and he doesn't play for his first 4 years. He plays for a fifth year, and he's dying to get on the field, but his coach won't play him. But what we're going to see is that Kurt is determined. He's not going to take no for an answer. He's willing to put in the work. He's willing to do whatever it takes to make his dream a reality. And that sets up our next scene. Check this out. So one of the themes throughout this film is the courage to take the hit and get back up. It's this idea that if you want to achieve greatness, you got to be willing to take a hit. You got to be willing to stay in the pocket. You need to understand that greatness doesn't come on an easy path. It comes with being tackled. It comes with being told no. It comes with adversity. And it's getting back up. It's pushing through the difficulties that allows you to achieve greatness, the courage to take the hit and get back up. Well, one thing that we see throughout the film is that difficult things continue to happen to Kurt, but he doesn't let go of this dream. And at one point, he meets a woman, her name is Brenda, and he wants to date her, and this comes with some difficulties as well. She tells him no at first, and he keeps pursuing her, and eventually she lets him know that the reason she's saying no is because she has not too long ago gone through a divorce. Her husband cheated on her, she has 2 kids, she is now a single mom, and she is scared to jump into another relationship. And he assures her that he'll take care of her, that he will be different than the last guy, and so they start a relationship relationship, and we see that their relationship, there's some difficulties because she's trying to become a nurse, and so she's in medical school, and he's trying to pursue his dream to become an NFL quarterback. That doesn't come with a lot of money, and so they are struggling, and they are tired, and they're raising 2 kids, and that sets up our next scene. Check this out. Don't give up. He is pursuing a dream to be an NFL quarterback, but to make ends meet, Kurt Warner starts to stock shelves at the Hy-Vee. And his line that he says, I think it's an amazing line. He says, sometimes you've got to do what you've got to do until you can do what you want to do. Let me say that again. Sometimes you've got to do what you got to do until you can do what you want to do. If you've ever had a dream, if you've ever had a vision for your life, if you've ever seen something and said, okay, I don't like where I'm at, I want to be somewhere else. If you've ever had even a glimpse of that, you need to know that it doesn't come overnight. It doesn't just come because you have a dream or a vision. It doesn't just come because you want something. You've got to be willing to take the hits. You've got to be willing to push through the adversity. You've got to be willing to do what you've got to do until you can do what you want to do. This is so incredibly crucial. And if I could just take a real quick pause, there are way too many people that want greatness for their life, but they're not willing to work for it. There are way too many people that want the title of boss or CEO, but they're not willing to wash dishes to get there. And no one is going to put a title on you just because you exist or because you want something. If you want something great, you've got to work at it. Okay. Guarantee that's a manager or a leader of something. Guarantee it. If you want something great, though, I'm telling you, do not wait until someone gives you a title to start working hard. Do not wait to become a great person and think one day when I get married, then I'll become a great person. No, if you're single, work on yourself right now. Do the hard work right now. It'll pay off in the future. You start working hard now and eventually it'll pay off. There are way too many people that are entitled and just think, well, I deserve better than what I have right now, so I'm just going to sit around and wait for greatness to come. Kurt Warner did not view life that way. He did whatever it took, including stocking shelves at Hy-Vee. Well, Kurt ends up stocking shelves, and this seems really, really far away from the dream of being an NFL quarterback, but he won't give up on his dream, and this sets up our next scene. Check it out. I don't know if you've ever had a dream, but if you ever had a dream, you can relate to the way that he looks at that Wheaties box. I'm an author. I've written 4 books, and every time I go to a bookstore or every time I go to an airport and I see the bookstores in the airport, I look at their new release section the way that he looked at that Wheaties box. One day, I'll have a book there. One day. I don't know when. All I have to do is keep being faithful, keep doing the work, keep putting it in, and I believe one day it's going to get there. But in the meantime, you got to stay faithful with where you're at. You got to work hard with where you're at. Stacking shelves at Hy-Vee is a long way from being an NFL quarterback, but he did it to the best of his ability, and he still held on to that dream. And I won't give you all the details. You have to watch the movie to see how he gets there, but eventually he gets an opportunity to try out for the St. Louis Rams, a professional NFL team. And in this scene we're about to see, he is meeting with the coach. And he is convinced that the coach is about to let him go. And the reason is because he's been out of college for like 14 years now. He hasn't played in the NFL. He's getting older. He doesn't have the background. He's been away from it for a long time. And everyone tells him this is a ridiculous thing. Everyone, the media, his teammates, even some of the coaches are like, you do not belong here. You shouldn't be here. And so he has a meeting with his coach, and he's convinced that the coach is about to let him go and tell him that his dream is over. And that sets up our final scene for the day. Check it out. That scene is pivotal because we learn why his coach believes in him. His coach believes in him because his coach is also an underdog. His coach was out of the league for 14 years, and when he came back, everybody said, this is impossible, you're too old, you can't do it. And so because he was an underdog, he saw something in Kurt. And his coach says a line that I believe is the parable of the film. The parable of an American underdog is all that life experience made me ready for this moment. All that life experience, all that rejection, all that pain, all that disappointment, every time someone told me no, it made me ready for this moment. Now, Kurt Warner is a Christian, and they kind of highlight it in the film, but they don't give it as much emphasis as his real-life faith has. If you want to learn more about his faith, read the book that this movie is based off of. He goes in a lot more detail about his faith, because his faith is a key component to why he did not give up. And if you're here today and you've ever had a dream for your life, if you've ever had a vision, if you've ever thought to yourself, I'm not satisfied with where I'm at, then I think you're going to be able to relate to this parable. We're going to see that this story, Kurt Warner's story, An American Underdog, it illustrates perfectly a story that we learn about in the Old Testament of the Bible. If you grew up going to church, you're very familiar with this story. It's a story of David versus Goliath. It's a real-life story that really happened. And if you didn't grow up in church, there's a great chance you're at least somewhat familiar about it. Because every time there's an underdog that faces adversity and it's a giant, someone references David versus Goliath. It's a real-life story. And a lot of us are so familiar with it, we forget the details that surrounded this story. What I want to do this morning is I want to show you the story before the story. We all know how the battle ends. We know what happens with David versus Goliath. But I want to walk you through the process, what David had to go through before he even took the battlefield with Goliath. And with that being said, we're going to dive into our text for today. We're going to start with 1 Samuel 17, verses 20 through 24. The text says, "Early in the morning, David left the flock in the care of a shepherd, loaded up and set out as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and asked his brothers how they were. As he was talking with them, Goliath the Philistine, champion from Gath, stepped out from the lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear." Now let's stop there just for a second. Let me give you a little bit of context to what's going on. Most scholars believe that David was between the ages of 16 and 18 when this story takes place. David is at home because he's not old enough to be on the battlefield, and he is a shepherd. He's watching over the sheep. His dad, Jesse, has multiple sons, and all the other sons are at the battlefield. Jesse needs to know how his sons are doing. He wants to know what's going on at the battlefield. And back then, they didn't have the internet. They didn't have newspapers. They didn't have a way for him to learn what was going on the battlefield. So he goes to his youngest son, and he says, "Here, take some food to your brothers, and go get me word on what's going on the battlefield." So David just does what his dad asks him to do. He just brings the food to his brothers. And when he walks up, he sees that the battle lines are drawn, but nobody is fighting. That's an odd thing for a battlefield. And on one side, you have the Israelites, God's chosen people. They are lined up like they are about to fight, but no one is fighting. And on the other side, you have the Philistines, dun, 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 the enemy of the Israelites. And out of the Philistines comes a giant named Goliath. And the text says that he defies the armies of God. Meaning, he doesn't just want to fight them. He is saying to them, your God is not good. Your God will not save you. Your God is not the real God. It wasn't just a fight. It wasn't just a battle. It was a battle of the gods. Now, this should have stirred something up in the people of Israel. Someone should have risen up. But the text says that every time Goliath defied them, all the fighting men ran away in fear. So David, a little punk shepherd boy, shows up and he sees everyone is afraid. And look at what happens next. 1 Samuel 17, 25 through 27. It says, "Now the Israelites had been saying, 'Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel.' David asked the men standing near, 'What's going to be done for the man who kills the Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?' They repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, 'This is what will be done for the man who kills him.' So David walks up on the battlefield, and the men are talking that if someone is to fight Goliath, they will become rich and famous. The king will give them riches. He will exempt them from ever having to pay taxes, and he will give them his daughter in marriage. This is like a big deal. And you would think that someone would say, 'Well, I want to be rich. I want to be famous. I'll step up for that.' But they were so afraid of the giant that not even great wealth could motivate them. And David walks up and is like, 'Yo, I'll do this for free.'" You guys aren't bothered by what he's saying? Let me just be clear. This guy is defying our God, and none of you are going to step up to the plate? I'll fight this guy, and then if you want to throw on the riches, I'll take that too. But someone should stand up to this guy. This guy is defying our God. He's standing against our God. And I don't know if you've ever had a dream or a vision, but when God starts to stir something in your life, it is often incredibly scary. And when God tells you to do something, you can often know that it's from God because you can't do it in your own strength. And if you could do it in your own strength, it wouldn't be from God. God is calling you to do something bigger than what you can do on your own, because if you could do it in your own strength, you wouldn't rely on Him. And we know in this text that everyone is afraid, but David isn't. What's the difference between David and these men? It's not experience. It's not that he is tall or strong. It's not that he's old or he's battle tested. The difference is he comes in the name of the Lord. He has a vision from God. And when you have a vision from God, other people are going to say it's impossible. They're going to say it can't happen, but you hold strong to that vision. Right now, I don't know if you know this or not, but right now in the U.S., there are 100,000 children in foster care. 100,000. And when I hear that number, I'm just like, that's too big. Like, that's too big of a problem for me to do anything about it. But there's a couple in our area that had a vision to connect the local church with foster care. And what they said is that there are 300,000 churches and 100,000 kids in foster care. If we could just get a portion of those churches to start taking care of foster care, we'd eliminate this problem. It's a God-sized problem. It's bigger than them. But their company is called We Are the Echo, and it's one of our strategic partners here. And what I love about them is they are doing the impossible. They are literally trying to solve the crisis of foster care in America. And if you are ever in an instance where you're like, okay, you know what, that's a big problem, and you hear the whisper of God, can I just tell you, it's going to scare you half to death, but it's worth it to step out on the battlefield. Because we don't know the names of anyone else at this battlefield. Like, we don't talk about anyone else here. But yet today we're still talking about David because he came in the name of the Lord. Look at what happens next. This is where the conflict starts. 1 Samuel 17:28 says, when Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. Did you catch what just happened? David is where he is supposed to be, doing what he's supposed to be doing. His dad tells him to go to the battlefield. And when he shows up, no one is willing to do anything about this problem. So he starts to say, okay, I'll do something about the problem. And his older brother starts to criticize him. Can I just tell you that anytime you try to do anything that is bigger than you, someone's going to criticize you, and oftentimes it's family. And they're too scared to do anything about the problems in the world, so they are going to insult you. Their insecurity and their fear is causing them to tear you down. The person that should have stood up on the battlefield is Eliab. He's the oldest brother. His young punk brother comes to the field and he's insecure and he feels bad about himself and he feels shame that he's not willing to fight. So instead of celebrating what his brother's willing to do, he puts him down. It's been said a bazillion times, but hurt people hurt people. And can I just tell you that anytime you try to do anything for God, some hurt person is going to come at you. Years ago, when I was really early in ministry, it was one of the first sermons I ever preached at church, in big church. And I preached a sermon and I felt really good about it. My wife thought it was a good sermon. My family thought it was a good sermon. I got a few emails where people said, hey, God spoke to you through that sermon. But on the Tuesday of the following week, I got an anonymous letter. And at that time, I didn't know that you should just never read anonymous letters because they're written by cowards who are going to insult you and tear you down, don't have the guts to tell you about a problem to your face. I just thought, someone took the time to write me a letter? That's amazing. I should read this. So I open up the letter, and it is 2 pages, but it's front and back. So 4 pages, just destroying my sermon. I mean, not just saying I didn't like it. It said things like, I'm so thankful Wavy TV 10 wasn't at our church to get footage of how horrible that sermon was. Wavy TV 10 was never at our church. I don't even know what this person was talking about. They said things like the sermon was so bad they couldn't sleep at night. They were up all night long tossing and turning about how bad the sermon was. They said they could tell that everyone else around them felt the exact same way, and we're going to be lucky if anyone shows up to church the following week. I don't know who this person is, and I'm reading these words, 4 pages. I read it 4 times, and on the 4th time of reading these words, I was allowing an anonymous person to define who I was. And I was allowing an anonymous person to tell me that I didn't have worth and to tell me that I had messed up. And on the fourth reading of that letter, I heard a still small voice, I believe it was the voice of God, said, even if you preached a perfect sermon, someone would crucify it. And at that point, I felt so much freedom, because the truth is, it probably wasn't a perfect sermon. I'm not a perfect pastor, but I don't preach for people, I preach for God. And so I balled up that letter, I threw it away, and I didn't read it again. Can I just tell you, if you try to do anything that is bigger than yourself, someone is going to criticize you. Someone's going to tear you down. But you need to know your worth. You need to know your purpose. You need to know why you're doing what you're doing, or you will back down to these people, these critics. Now, before we move on, I just want to touch on just real quickly, because if you try something great, you will have an Eliab in your life, but there's also a great chance that at some point in your life, you've been an Eliab. That someone else in your life has a dream, has a vision, is trying to accomplish something, and because of your fear, you've criticized them. So I want to ask you some rhetorical questions to get you thinking about, are you an Eliab, or are you being an Eliab? Here's the questions. Do I project my fear onto someone else's story? When someone tells you they're doing something, if you're afraid, do you project that fear onto them? Well, I would never do that, therefore you should never do that. But what if what they're doing is obeying God? Do I feel threatened by someone else's courage? Do I feel threatened that someone else is willing to take the hits? Do I feel threatened that someone else is willing to go out and do something that is bigger than themselves? Do I get jealous of other people when they get what I want? This is a big one. Oftentimes we criticize others because we think, well, why not me? Why are they there? Why do they have that success? Why do they have that marriage? Why do they have those kids? Why do they have that job? Why do they have what I want? And our jealousy ends up causing us to tear down and to be negative. And when we do, we are being an Eliab. Here's one final question. Do I trust God enough to allow someone to fail while attempting their dream? Do I trust God enough? If someone comes to you and has a God-sized dream, do you trust that, okay, if they fail, God still got them? It's not on you, it's on them. Do you trust? Are you willing to allow people to go out and to dream big and fail? Or are you so controlling that you're going to tear down their dream before they even get started? Listen, if you are not living a great story, if you're not living something great for God, it is so easy to nitpick other people's stories. And if you're not willing to get your hands dirty and to get on the battlefield and start doing something dynamic for God, don't you dare criticize someone who is. It is much easier to be a critic than it is to be a director. In the film industry, you have a director who's responsible for everything that happens in a movie. And that means that when the movie is a success, they get all the praise, they get all the credit. But when that movie fails, they get all the criticism. It is hard work to be a director, to lead people to do things. Did you know that there are some people who get paid millions of dollars and they don't direct films, all they do is critique films. They get paid millions of dollars to watch someone else's work and tear it down. That's their full-time job. It is easier to be a critic than it is to be a director. And if you are here today and you're not willing to be a director, don't you dare criticize someone else who is. Often the voices that are the loudest are the ones who are not on the battlefield. Often the voices that are the biggest and the first to criticize are the ones that aren't willing to get their hands dirty. If there's issues and there's problems, great, jump in and help fix them. If you're not, be quiet. That applause was kind of quiet. Let's see what happens next. 1 Samuel 17, 29 through 31. Now what have I done, said David. Can't I even speak? He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the men answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. David was willing to take the licks, and he kept going. David's brother comes to him, and just put yourself in David's sandals for just a second. If you were standing on the battlefield, and your older brother was telling you, just be quiet, you're selfish, go back to your sheep, what would you do? I would be like, oh, you're probably right, I'm a nobody, let me just go back to the sheep. But David's like, can't I even speak? I haven't done anything to you. Just because you're afraid, don't put that fear on me. Someone has to stand up against this giant. And if you're not going to do it, then I'm going to do it in the name of the Lord. And he is so bold, it gets the attention of the king of Israel. So now he's gone from being just someone delivering food to having a one-on-one meeting with the king of Israel. And look at what happens. This is the part of the story that so many people forget. This is the part of the story that people are not familiar with. 1 Samuel 17, 32 through 33. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul replied, "You're not able to go up against this Philistine and fight him. You're only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." So who knows how long this has been going on in the battlefield, like weeks, like it's just been going on where Goliath is defying the army and no one is standing up. And now Saul finally has someone who's willing to fight him, and he's like, "Nope, you can't do it. You're just a kid. You're just weak." Can I tell you something, though, that's amazing? Is that when God calls you to do something and other people don't understand, you're in great company, because people didn't understand when God called a stutterer named Moses to go to Egypt and release the people from slavery. And people didn't understand when God called a little humble woman named Mary to birth the Savior of the world. And people didn't understand when God called Abraham and Sarah to give birth to a nation, even though they were way past the birthing age. If you have an assignment on your life, if you have a mission from God, if God is whispering in your heart to do something, it's not going to make sense, because if it made sense, it wouldn't be from God. And other people may criticize you. Other people may tell you you can't do it, but you are in great company to do something great for God, because you're not doing it for man's approval. You're doing it for the God of the universe. You're not able to go up against this Philistine. You're only a young man. Well, who are you to tell me who I am? Who are you? Listen, the king of Israel may have been influential, but he's not more influential than the God of the universe. What does God say about you? Find your identity in God. Find out what God has called you to do. Find out what God says you are. Find out what God calls you to be. Listen to that voice, because it's so much better than any critic out there. And David stands literally in front of the king of Israel. He hears him say that he can't do this. And look at what David says, 1 Samuel 17, 34 through 37. But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." Do you see how this parallels the story of Kurt Warner? That David spent his whole life doing a task that no one cared about. He was a shepherd boy. He wasn't old enough or good enough to be on the battlefield. They had forgotten about him. They'd thrown him away. And when he shows up to the battlefield, they tell him, "You can't do this." And he says, No. God has been preparing me for this moment. Because there was a lion that attacked the sheep, and I stood against him in the name of the Lord. And there was a bear that attacked my sheep, and I stood against him in the name of the Lord. And the same God that delivered me from them is going to deliver me from this Philistine. Who are you to tell me what I can't do? Who are you to speak that negativity over my life? The God of the universe has called me to do something. And this is the parable of American Underdog. All that life experience made me ready for this moment. All that life experience. That time in the pasture with the sheep made him ready for this moment. And can I just tell you, if you're not where you think you should be, do not despise small beginnings. Because those small beginnings is what God is going to use for a future story. And you may not be where you think you're supposed to be. You may be single and say, "Oh man, why am I still single? I want to be married." Don't despise this time period. Become who God's created you to be. Work on yourself. Become the best version of yourself now, and watch what God does one day when he delivers that person into your life. If you're a parent here today and you're like, "Man, my kids are struggling," don't give up. Don't stop. You keep parenting them. You keep loving them. You keep plugging them into church. You keep holding on to it, and just know that this hard work now, it's going to pay off. One day they're going to grow into adults, and they'll appreciate the fact that you didn't make church optional, and they'll appreciate the fact that you grew them up in a Christian home, and they'll stick to the faith because you didn't back down. If you're here today and you're a couple and you're like, "Man, we want kids, and God, we just can't have kids. God, why won't you give us this thing that we want?" Can I just tell you, do not despise this time that you're in. It may be difficult, but I'm telling you, it's going to set you up for the future. What God does in the pasture, what God does with the sheep, what God does while you're stocking shelves at a high low is he prepares you for the future. It is during the time of small beginnings that God works on our character, which in time will show its strength and purpose. It is during the time of small beginnings. It's during the time where no one's watching. It's during the time when you don't have a job title. It's during the time when no one's giving you the attention that you think you need. It's during the time when you're starting that new business, when you're trying to solve that problem that no one else is going to solve. It's during that time, it's during that struggle, it's during the small beginnings that God works on your character. Because if you had success from the very beginning, your character couldn't handle it. But it's in taking the hits, it's in being pummeled, it's in taking the hits over and over again and getting back up that's building your character so that one day when success comes, you have character to stand on. And you're not going to fall like everyone else because you know that the success came from God. It's during the time of small beginnings. So may we be a people that does not despise small beginnings. May we never be an Eliab who criticizes others who dream big. May we be a coach that inspires others and say, hey, listen, even if no one else believes in you, I believe in you. I believe that God's going to do something great in you. If we're not going to dream big, may we never criticize others who do. And may we be patient in the times of waiting, because it's in the times of waiting that God develops our character. If you would, just bow your head and close your eyes. I want to speak just real quickly to anyone that's here today that doesn't know Jesus. If you've never met God, if you've never started a relationship with Him, I want to introduce you and tell you how to do that, because the God of the universe is so much greater than anything else, and He's so personal, and He wants to be a part of your life. So if you're here today and you would say, I don't know Jesus, I want to give you a chance to meet Him. I want to invite you just to pray a very simple prayer, just quietly in your heart. If you've never become a Christian before, just repeat this prayer. God, I thank you that you love me. I admit that I'm a sinner. I admit that I failed. But I thank you that you love me anyway. And God, I ask that you would come into my heart, that you would save me, and that you would help me live for you all the days of my life. And I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.